I love reading the Psalms. They show the raw emotions of those who wrote them. King David is thought to have written some of the Psalms, but they were written by others at different times in Jewish history over a course of many years. They are basically a sacred song or poem, as Mike talked about earlier on in the month, and they form the basis of a lot of our hymns and worship songs. The Psalms are worth getting to know, and if you are able to, I would suggest that you might like to read one a day. In the Bible that we use, there are 150 Psalms, and they cover most aspects of the human condition, as well as our relationship with God. In studying the Psalms, we should remember that they were originally intended to be heard and said aloud, or even set to music. So I would suggest that as you read them aloud, or if you wish, sing them. The main categories of the Psalms are as follows. There are Psalms of praise, generally focusing on the nature of God and not on the specific things he has done. They tell us about God's attributes and encourages us to praise him for his goodness and righteousness, his judgment and his wisdom. And they often refer to playing music or singing and dancing. There are Psalms of wisdom, which contain teachings and wise advice, but in the form of a hymn or poem. These general principles were meant to instruct believers on how to live a godly life, to follow God's commandments. There are Psalms of thanksgiving. They offer the believers praise and thanksgiving for what God has done for us. And sometimes this is a specific thing that we are thanking God about, but it can be thanksgiving for God in general. And actually, we should thank God a lot more than we probably do for the help and guidance he has given us. And we do often overlook that type of prayer. There are Psalms of lament. They respond to a crisis, grief or despair. They're intended to help us cope with the hurts that we encounter. This type of psalm expresses that God is present even when we cannot discern his presence in the world due to our own or the suffering of others. And there are Psalms of adoration. They express the believer's love of God and reverence for his goodness, his wisdom, might, power, his love, and the awe-inspiring nature around us. They are related to the praise psalms, but they are a little bit more specific in their understanding. They are meant to make us think, really think, about just who God really is. Then there are psalms of supplication, asking God to provide us with something we need or desire. And this is quite often the most common form of prayer for us all. And often we request prayers for health and healing, particularly for those who are known to us who need our prayers at times in their lives. But it can be a prayer for something we need help with right now. And I believe that God hears every prayer and every psalm we use. There are psalms of contrition, expressing sorrow for those sins that we have committed. They are an important part of our faith in God and Christ. We are human and need to remember that we need to acknowledge when we do not follow his path. By saying, thinking, or doing something we know we shouldn't. And we need to say sorry, to accept that what we have done or thought or said, and resolve to move on in God's light and not to keep repeating our wrongdoings. I believe that it is no coincidence that these psalms or prayers are the basis of the Lord's Prayer. which acknowledges God as supreme, allows us to acknowledge his greatness, accepts our very existence comes from God, and accepts that we have our daily needs, and we ask God for forgiveness and accept that we need to walk with God in a better life. The disciples and those around Jesus would have known these psalms off by heart. They would have used them daily. Again, as Mike has said, they would have been Jesus's hymn book. And what I particularly like about them is that they were written over 3,500 years ago by human beings who understood exactly about life, its joys, tribulations, heartaches, questioning and acceptance of God. They were written because the same feelings and emotions that were part of the lives of those then are exactly as they are for us today. That is why they are so relevant for us. They were good for those so long ago, including Jesus as he came in our human form, and they are great for us today. Can I suggest that you start to read them if you haven't already, and if you have, reread them. Try to work out what they're saying to you in particular. If you're able to, make a note of the ones that speak to you and why they are speaking to you, especially at this time. Over the next 4 days, I'm going to be looking at some of the Psalms in particular. I would love to hear about your own particular thoughts on a psalm, or the Psalms in general. Do you have a particular favourite? Do you have one that you go back to time and time again? What psalms do you find difficult? What psalms have you never read? What psalms have you never even thought about? Excuse me. Let me know, either at the bottom of this feed or when you see me. It would be good to compare. Tomorrow I am going to look at the psalm that is for St. Bartholomew's Day. Wednesday I'm going to be looking at probably the most popular psalm. Thursday I'm going to look at the psalm that I go to time and time again. The psalm that I have used a lot in my life. And Friday, well, I'll let you wait till Friday. But please do let me know what you think of the Psalms. Have you ever even thought of them? Let me know if you've never really looked at them. And as I said, there's 150 of them in our Bible. Some are very short, some are very long. But if you could read some of them, I think you would find it most worthwhile. I think you will recognise most of the things that the psalmist is saying, and you'll find out just how relevant they are to us all. Amen.